This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, for all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what the president can do.
Did anybody last night watch a thing called The Debate?
3 hours watching, begging, being begged by his vice president to do something, to call for a stop, to end it.
What happened to the United States' reputation is horrible.
He studied very hard. He studied so hard that he didn't know what the hell he was doing.
Trump versus United States. On Monday, the Supreme Court ruled that former President Donald Trump is entitled to immunity from federal prosecution for actions he took while in office. This landmark decision, arriving amid the height of an election season, postpones the start of his criminal trial in Washington, D.C. In a 6-3 decision along ideological lines, the Supreme Court overturned a ruling from the Federal Appeals Court in Washington which had determined that Trump was not entitled to broad immunity from criminal charges related to an alleged scheme to retain power following the 2020 election. The Supreme Court has remanded the case back to the District Court for further proceedings, providing specific guidance on how to proceed. This ruling significantly expands presidential power by extending immunity from criminal prosecutions to former presidents for their official conduct. The Supreme Court had never before addressed whether a former president could face criminal charges for actions taken while in office. Trump is the first president to confront such prosecution, having pleaded not guilty to 4 charges related to an alleged effort to subvert the transfer of power after the 2020 election. The former president celebrated the decision, calling it a big win for our constitutional and democracy in a social media post. The special counsel declined to comment on the ruling. President Biden criticized the decision, arguing that it allows any president to ignore the law. He stated, "This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the president alone." In the case of Trump versus United States, the Supreme Court ruled that former presidents have sweeping legal protections from charges for alleged acts within their official duties. However, the court rejected Trump's claim to absolute immunity unless impeached by the House and convicted by the Senate, which would have ended the federal prosecution by special counsel Jack Smith. Chief Justice John Roberts authored the opinion for the majority, categorizing presidential conduct into 3 areas: official acts within the president's core constitutional powers, other official acts outside their exclusive authority, and unofficial acts. Presidents have absolute immunity for the first category, presumptive immunity for the second, and no immunity for the third. This ruling makes it unlikely that a trial will occur before the November presidential election, as the district court is now tasked with examining some of the allegations in the indictment to determine whether they fall within the scope of immunity. Smith's indictment accused Trump of conspiring with Justice Department officials to pressure states into overturning election results. The Chief Justice stated that Trump is absolutely immune from the prosecution for the alleged conduct involving his discussions with Justice Department officials, since the president cannot be prosecuted for conduct within his exclusive constitutional authority. Chief Justice Roberts also addressed allegations that former President Trump pressured then Vice President Mike Pence to delay Congress certification of the Electoral College votes on January 6, 2021. Roberts emphasized that it is the government's responsibility to rebut the presumption of Trump's immunity for such actions. Regarding other allegations, such as organizing false slates of electors, communicating with outside attorneys, and urging supporters to converge on Washington on January 6, the court ruled that protections from prosecution may depend on the content and context of the allegations. The Supreme Court instructed the District Court to carefully analyze the indictment's remaining allegations to determine whether they too involve conduct for which a president must be immune from prosecution. Additionally, the court ruled that testimony or private records of the president or his advisors related to these actions cannot be admitted as evidence at trial. The minority dissent. In a strongly worded dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, joined by Justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson, argued that the Supreme Court's decision to grant former President Donald Trump immunity from federal prosecution for official actions taken while in office dangerously reshapes the presidency by insulating presidents from criminal liability. Sotomayor accused the conservative majority of fabricating an atextual, ahistorical, and unjustifiable immunity that puts the president above the law. Sotomayor and the dissenting justices emphasized that the decision undermines a foundational principle of the U.S. Constitution that no one is above the law. It makes a mockery of the principle, foundational to our Constitution and system of government, that no man is above the law, they asserted. A central critique from Sotomayor was the majority's failure to establish a clear limit on presidential immunity. While the majority opinion did state that a former president could be prosecuted for private conduct, Sotomayor contended that their criteria for distinguishing between official and unofficial conduct narrows the scope of what can be considered unofficial. She argued that this narrowing unjustifiably expands presidential immunity. Sotomayor also dismissed concerns that the threat of criminal liability would inhibit future presidential actions, pointing out that the safeguards required for federal criminal prosecution are already sufficient protection for presidents. According to Sotomayor, the majority's position undermines the independence of the executive branch by allowing former presidents to evade accountability for illegal actions while disabling the current executive from prosecuting such violations. Calling the decision deeply wrong, Sotomayor warned of its long-term consequences, arguing that it creates a law-free zone around the president and disrupts the status quo that has existed since the nation's founding. To illustrate the potential dangers of the ruling, she cited hypothetical scenarios discussed in lower court proceedings, such as a president being shielded from prosecution for ordering the assassination of a political rival, organizing a military coup, or accepting a bribe in exchange for a pardon. Sotomayor concluded her dissent with a stark warning about the implications for American democracy. "With fear for our democracy, I dissent." She emphasized that the decision not only shields presidents from accountability but also fundamentally alters the balance of power and the rule of law in the United States, setting a dangerous precedent for future presidencies. Trump's immunity claim. Former President Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican presidential nominee, has been seeking to delay legal proceedings in several cases until after the upcoming presidential election. If he prevails over President Biden in November, Trump could potentially order the Justice Department to drop federal charges against him or issue a self-pardon, though the constitutionality of such a move remains untested. In addition to the charges related to the 2020 election in Washington, Trump faces other significant legal battles. In South Florida, he has been indicted for allegedly mishandling sensitive government documents after leaving office and has pleaded not guilty to 40 federal counts. In Fulton County, Georgia, Trump is being prosecuted for allegedly attempting to overturn the results of the state's 2020 election and has also pleaded not guilty to all state charges. The issue of presidential immunity thrust the Supreme Court into a politically charged legal dispute just months before the election. Trump contends that he is being unfairly targeted as part of a scheme to protect President Biden, although there is no evidence that the prosecution, initiated by a special counsel appointed by Attorney General Merrick Garland, is politically motivated. The case represents the second instance this term in which the Supreme Court has made a significant ruling affecting Trump. In March, the court unanimously ruled that states cannot bar Trump from the ballot under an obscure provision of the 14th Amendment that prohibited former insurrectionists from holding public office. Trump appointed 3 of the 9 judges, creating a 6-3 conservative majority. He urged the Supreme Court to rule that former presidents are immune from criminal prosecution for official acts. The court heard arguments in Trump's appeal in late April, the last of its term. These arguments coincided with a historic 6-week criminal trial in New York, where Trump was convicted on 34 state felony counts of falsifying business records, becoming the first former president found guilty of a crime. He has vowed to appeal this verdict, a process that could take months or even years, with sentencing set for July 11 in Manhattan. The proceedings related to Trump's criminal cases are unprecedented. The case concerning the 2020 election presented a novel issue for the Supreme Court. During oral arguments, the conservative justices appeared aware that their ruling would set a precedent for future presidencies and consider the potential long-term ramifications for future occupants of the Oval Office. Trump's legal team argued that the unique nature of the charges against him demonstrated that presidents are broadly immune from criminal prosecution for official acts. They urged the justices to overturn the lower court rulings, including one from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, which had unanimously allowed the prosecution to proceed. In contrast, Special Counsel Jack Smith and his team of prosecutors contended that no one, including former presidents, is above the law. They argued that Trump's alleged conduct was outside his official duties and constituted a private scheme to remain in power. The Supreme Court's decision to grant Trump immunity for his official actions marks a landmark expansion of presidential power by protecting former presidents from criminal prosecution for conduct within their official duties. The ruling has profound implications for the balance of power and the principle that no one is above the law. The court's conservative majority, appointed in part by Trump himself, ruled in his favor, sparking controversy and debate about the decision's long-term impact on American democracy. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.